I've found even more ugly F1 cars today, and some of these are absolutely wild concepts. Yesterday I spoke about the Brabham BT23 with its biplane wing, which presumably gave the driver a bit of shade. And I'll start today's video with yet another car which proves that people in the 1960s really just kinda did stuff. This is the Cosworth 4-wheel drive, and if you think it looks strange, you should see what's going on under that Malite body. Malite, you ask? What's that? Well, the car is made out of a material that is used almost exclusively on this car. There are a few other cars that use this, such as the McLaren M2, but what exactly is Malite? It's one of the first composite materials used in a race car ever. It's basically sheets of aluminium alloy sandwiching a sheet of wood between them. Malite is not very flexible, so it isn't good at making curved panels, which is why this car is so angular and pointy with flat sheets. Malite was used to save weight that was taken up by the car's 4-wheel drive system. They figured that 4-wheel drive would help with cornering, something the powerful but heavy and also legendary Cosworth DFV was not helping Cosworth powered teams with, but it turned out that the Cosworth 4-wheel drive actually handled worse due to extreme understeer. The project was abandoned and never started a race. The 4-wheel drive system also made the driver's seating position slightly off-centre, since the driver sits on the floor and the drive shaft needs to fit there somehow. The car is surprisingly well documented for an unraced and rather poor performing F1 car from 50 years ago that would need a carpenter to show up to fix it in a crash. All pictures of the car show it in a shiny, unpainted Malite. But what about when a car's paint is what makes it ugly? This is the Honda RA107, and in terms of its shape, it's actually quite a nice looking car. But why have they painted it by first applying a layer of blue paint before putting Shrek in a blender and throwing a bucket of Shrek at the car? Well, if you look closely, it turns out they didn't put Shrek in a blender at all. Instead, this is supposed to be a map of the Earth. This was known as the Earth Dreams livery. This linked to a website, myearthdreams.com. Unfortunately, I can't get it to load in the Wayback Machine, as this requires Adobe Flash Player, which was shut down several years ago, making it somewhat of a bizarre piece of F1 lost media. But some low-resolution screenshots of the website do exist, and it appears to be about making some sorts of pledges about being environmentally friendly. That's cool and all, but why is it on Honda's F1 livery? The official story was that Honda just wanted to show how much they care about the environment. And of course, they had Earth Dream engines, but these only came out many years after this livery. But Honda's performance in F1 at the time was lacking, and they couldn't find many sponsors, so many suggested that the Earth Dreams livery was actually Honda used to cover up the fact that the car had nearly no sponsors on it. With no sponsors on the car, they decided to use the car's livery to put something about the environment on there, because that'd make Honda more popular, especially with that environmentally friendly 2.4 litre 750 horsepower V8 in the car. Either way, this was some way of Honda trying to build public support for their brand by appearing to be eco-friendly. 2007 was definitely a different time. You couldn't get away with showing up to an F1 race with an environmental livery these days. Certain groups of people would have a complete meltdown if they saw it. This wasn't the first time this team did something weird with a livery though. Just a couple of years earlier, under the BAR name, this same team made this livery. Or should I say, liveries. They couldn't decide on which livery to go with, so they just went with both. What actually happened is they launched two perfectly good liveries, but the FIA said you can only have one livery per team, so they produced this abomination instead. The Zip Abomination was powered by a Honda engine. Another car with a Honda engine in the back was the Jordan EJ11, which was a great looking car. That was until they went to the Monaco Grand Prix and put this on it. In Monaco, the teams prioritise downforce over all else. This means the teams add what's known as dirty downforce, where they just add downforce in inefficient ways where the downforce to drag ratio is bad, but it doesn't matter because the straights are so short anyway. You see it in the World Rally Championship all the time. It was this that resulted in Jordan adding the dirtiest of dirty downforce with his T-wing. The FIA intervened and told them to get rid of it before qualifying, as they claimed that it was impeding driver vision, something which is especially funny today when you consider that it's exactly where the halo pillar is. By the way, if you've got two eyes, the pillar won't actually be visible unless you specifically look at it. But it wasn't just Jordan who were putting ridiculous wings on their car at Monaco that year. There was another. This is the Arrows A22. It also looks pretty good, doesn't it? Now behold the Monaco variant. Once again, this variant was for dirty downforce. Now, I may have just said that the Jordan is the dirtiest of dirty downforce, but I've changed my mind. This one is. Unlike the Jordan, which used a small wing with a shallow angle of attack and no end plates, this one was the full deal. Double element with big end plates, narrower than the lower front wing, but taller and probably making a similar amount of downforce. This one was also banned for driver visibility rules, although this design does actually restrict visibility. The Arrows A22 wasn't the first double-decker in Formula 1. The 1978 McLaren M26 tried out a biplane front wing configuration at the Spanish Grand Prix. This was the ground effect era, but McLaren didn't have the ground effect downforce of the Lotus, because it wasn't a ground effect car at all. So McLaren needed to find downforce, and quickly. This was their solution. The top front wing was further back than the bottom front wing, but this didn't make the car look any less stupid. The car finished 6th. The 1970s always finds a way into these videos. Another product of the 1970s was the ATS HS1, which looks like some piece of alien construction equipment. ATS was a new constructor. They'd run as a privateer last year, and when they tried building their own car, this was a modification to the Penske PC4 they were racing the previous year. The team was evidently running low on money, so they got their bathtub out and used that as the cockpit. Eventually, they updated the design to remove the bathtub, and this update looked significantly better than its predecessor. It should come as no surprise that this car came from the same team which one year managed to have one of their drivers be recorded as a DNQ, a DNF, a DNS, and a disqualification all in the same race, as well as getting banned from Formula 1. Now, I want to talk about yesterday's video, because not only did I make the mistake of saying that Ferrari considered firing Schumacher after 1996 when it was actually 1997, but more importantly, I mentioned the March 711 and the Eifelland F1 team, stating that a modified March 711 was raced by Eifelland with Luigi Colani as their designer, and this modified March 711 also used the periscope mirror. Well, I've found pictures of this abomination of a machine. In fact, I've actually found quite a few pictures of it. See? I told you it was a thing. Not only that, but I've found more Colani Eifelland designs. This was the original concept of the Eifelland 21, and it's also hideous. This concept was dropped by Eifelland soon after they tested it, as it made too much drag. But many of the central design elements, such as the weird intake and the periscope, were kept. It's certainly a more creative way of making an F1 car ugly than just putting a wing in a place where it doesn't belong. One example of a wing where it doesn't belong is on the McLaren MP410. They got bored one day and decided to put a wing on the engine cover. What was actually happening though was once again a case of dirty downforce. They found a loophole that allowed them to put it there, so they took that loophole. This gave them two setup options, so they could go for a much better looking low drag engine cover when they didn't need the downforce, or the high drag version for when they did. Unfortunately, even in the low drag configuration, the rest of the car wasn't so good looking. It was an early high nose car, and you can tell the chassis was evolved from a low nose car. It was chunky and looked heavy, regardless of its actual weight. High noses only really started looking good when the chassis bulkhead was raised enough. One early high nose car that people often refer to as ugly is the McLaren MP4 5B high nose test car, but those people are wrong. This car looks good. So that's it for today's video. I'll find a new topic tomorrow, but if you know any more ugly F1 cars, write about them in the comments and I might revisit this topic one day.